Okay, in this lecture, we will be talking about intervals, musical intervals, that is. All right, so what is an interval? Well, an interval in music refers to the distance or relationship between two tones, right? Any two tones. So here's two tones, right? That's an interval right there. Here's another interval. Here's another two tones, right? How about from here to here? That's an interval also. You can play them from high to low. You can play them from low to high. You can play them at the same time. They're all intervals, right? They are two tones that have some distance between them. So intervals are named, right? They have specific names. And we're going to talk about those specific names like seconds and thirds and fourths and fifths and sixths and sevenths. So they're named for the number of diatonic notes that can be contained within them, right? So, for example, let's take G and A, right? So G and A forms what we called before a whole step, right? So it's still called a whole step, but it's also called a second, and here's why. It contains only two diatonic notes, right? Two diatonic notes, right? G and A, right? And remember, diatonic notes refers to notes with different letter names. So even though G and A have one key in between them, right, one black key, that black key doesn't have different diatonic name, right? It's going to be either G sharp or A flat. So from G to A is a second, right? Because it has just two diatonic notes. Now, if I went from G to B, that would be called a third, right? Because now I'm going to have three diatonic notes contained within this interval. So I'll have one, so G, A, B, that's 1, 2, 3. So that's going to be a third, right? If I went from G to C, that would be, what do you think? How many diatonic notes do we have contained within the interval from G to C? 1, 2, 3, 4. So G to C would be a fourth, right? And we can do that with G to D. That would be a fifth. G to E, same thing, a sixth, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. G to E. Or we could have a seventh, right? G to F, or an octave. So we'll talk more about those as we go here. So let's move on to slide number 2. All right, so this chart here we're going to use for the next few slides. But this chart shows all of the interval numbers within an octave, right? Remember, what's an octave? It's the distance. Well, in this case, we've got middle C to the next highest C. That's an octave. All right, so here we're going to have what's called a unison, a second, a third, a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and octave, starting with middle C and going up to the next highest C. So let's break these down a little bit more, going to slide number 3. So notice, the interval numbers correspond to the scale degree numbers for the major scale, right? So what we have here is really, if we look at the upper note of the graphic here on slide 3, we have the C major scale, right? C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, so and the interval numbers here correspond to the scale degree numbers. of that major scale. Remember also with the major scale we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Back when we studied major scales a couple chapters ago. So the interval consisting of two notes of the same pitch is called the unison, right? So if we look here at the far left on the graphic on slide number 3, if I had another keyboard over here to play the same middle C, and we played it at the same, if I played it at the same time as this, that would be a unison. It's hard to do on one keyboard because you only have one middle C. If you have a guitar, you can do it like that because you have middle C in a couple different locations. But that's unison. Let's talk about the others. Let's go to slide 4. So the other interval names, which I have already mentioned here, but once again, are going to be a second, right? From C to D in this case is a second. From C to E would be a third. From C to F would be a fourth. C to G is a fifth. C to A, a sixth. And C to B, a seventh. And then C to the next highest C would be an eighth, except for in music we just call it an octave. But there, it's 8 notes. It's the interval with the distance of 8 diatonic notes in between. Okay, so that's a little starter on how these intervals work. Let's put this into action a little bit by looking at Dona Nobis Pacem on slide number 5. So here's part of the melody of Dona Nobis Pacem, and I want you to name the interval numbers between each of the notes in this little excerpt of the melody. So the first few have been done. Let's talk about those. So let's look at the first 2 notes in Dona Nobis Pacem. What are they? Well, they are F to C, right? What interval is that? Well, it says fourth on here, but let's break it down a little bit. How do we know this? How do we know it's a fourth? Well, here's what we can do to figure this out. There's kind of a little strategy. So first off, know what the 2 pitches are, right? The first pitch is F. The second pitch is C. Okay, so you have that. Now the second step is to take the lower of the 2 and count up to the higher one, right? So here's the lower, C, D, E, F. And if I count it as 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Then I know, oh, that's a fourth, right? So step 1, figure out what the pitch letters are here, F and C. And then step 2 is start on the lower of the 2, which in this case is C, and count up to the higher of the 2, which is F. And go 1, 2, 3, 4, there's a fourth. Let's do the next one. So step 1, what are the 2 pitches here? We have C. We're gonna start on the one we left off on, right? Okay, so C to A is the next one here, right? So that was step 1. I figured out what the 2 pitch letters were. Now, step 2, just count from the lower to the higher, right? So C to A is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a sixth, right? How about the next one? Well, what are the 2 pitches? That's step 1. Well, it looks like we have A and then we have G, right? And A to G, we talked about this one earlier, but once again, let's start with the lower of the 2, G, and count up to the higher of the 2, A. That's going to be a second, right? 1, 2. Let's do a couple more here. So let's look at the next 2 pitches on Dona Nobis Pacem. They happen to be the first 2 pitches of the second measure. And they are what? G to C, right? So let's count from the lower one to the higher one. So the lower one is G, the higher one, the lower one is C, and the higher one is G. And we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a fifth, right? Okay, last one, and then you can do the rest yourself here. So, we're looking at the next two pitches, C, and the higher one is B, right? So we're gonna go next step, count from the lower to the higher. C is the lower, B is the higher. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is a seventh, right? Okay, so you can pause this video and take a little bit of time to figure out the rest of these that are on slide number 5. Also, probably what would be easier for you is to look this up in your book on page number 152 and just do it that way. All right.